Dr. Soumya Iktidar. She's currently serving as Associate Professor of Medicine at Mayo Hospital, Lahore, and she's also the Secretary General at PSIM. She's the Associate Editor of the Journal of Pakistan Society of Internal Medicine as well. Ma'am, please join us on stage.
Kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu Alaikum. Today we are going to talk about the sunshine in our life. And when I talk about sunshine in our life, one name that comes to our mind is vitamin D. So when I say vitamin D, तो लोगों का impression ये होता है कि ये क्या boring सा topic है. You know, in a medicine conference, when we are talking about advanced diseases, why is she talking about a vitamin or a mineral? So, the first impression that I get is it's going to be a very boring talk. But I will make sure that nobody sleeps during the lecture, and I update you with the latest information regarding this master vitamin, which has role in almost every system of the body. So let's look. Who is at risk? Am I at risk of vitamin D? I eat very well, I go out in the sun, I'm active, I do not have any nutritional deficiency. So do I suffer from vitamin deficiency, or is there a risk? So everyone sitting over here, ladies and gentlemen, every one of you is at risk. And those of you who are at more risk are people who are having advanced age, who are leading a very sedentary lifestyle with a very limited exposure to sun, who are very cautious and use sunscreen whenever they go out in the sun, people who have heavily pigmented skin, prolonged or exclusively breastfed infants, they are at risk, people living at northern altitudes, and smoking and obesity and renal or liver disease, and sometimes if you are on medication, especially on anti-epileptic medication or patients of HIV, they are at increased risk. Why is it? Okay, so what is this big deal about vitamin D deficiency? Let's have a look at some of the data. We all know that vitamin D deficiency is linked with bone health. And whenever we talk about vitamin D deficiency, the first word that comes to our mind is rickets. And in adults, sometimes osteomalacia. But today I am going to share with you a lot of data which supports that this vitamin has role in every disease that you can think of. May it be diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancers, infection, or even autoimmune diseases. So, for this very reason, this year in Science discovering the 100 top science stories, the vitamin D was put on number 8. Can vitamin D save our lives? And if you talk about Times magazine, the 10 biggest medical breakthrough, the one of them was the benefits of vitamin D. So how do we make vitamin D? So that's very simple. On exposure of skin to the sunlight, the UVB light that converts the 7-dehydroxycholesterol through the liver enzyme pathway into vitamin D, which is then measured in the blood. This is the inactive form of vitamin D. It is activated in the kidneys to 1,2,5-dihydroxycholecalciferol, which is the active metabolite of vitamin D, and the excess is then inactivated and removed from the body. So now the question arises, can we make too much vitamin D in our body? So the mother nature is very, intelligent, and whatever excess of vitamin D, if you have too much exposure to sunlight and you have more than sufficient levels of vitamin D, all of the excess vitamin D is inactivated and removed from the body. So from sunlight exposure, you cannot have excess vitamin D. And this vitamin D, which is formed in the skin by the exposure to the sunlight, it lasts 2 times longer than vitamin D from diet or supplements that we take. So this is the difference between outside supplementation of vitamin D via diet or supplements and the natural formation of vitamin D in the body, that the excess is never there in the body with sunlight and it lasts 2 times longer. So this is the vitamin which is formed in the body. But over the years, whenever we talk about sun exposure, first thing that dermatologists tell you, they don't go out in the sun without a sunscreen. They always advise you to have good sun protection because this is responsible for many of the skin cancers. And the sun exposure is the #1 cause of skin cancers. But actually, what data tells us that this is not the case. The influence of painful sunburns and lifetime sun exposures on the risk of actinic keratosis, seborrheic warts, melanocytic nevi and atypical nevi, which are all precursors of skin cancer, is not there with sun exposure. So this is the paper which is from the Journal of Dermatology, and it clearly shows that it is associated with a lower risk of malignant melanoma, and the attribution of sun exposure to malignant melanoma is not true in the correct sense. If we go back to history, Hess and Unger, these were the 2 scientists in New York in 1921 who discovered that there are many malnourished or sick babies in the community. And then they looked at these sick babies with deformities. They found out that this is rickets. And at that time, they told the world that exposure to the sunlight will correct many of these deformities and the babies will improve. So sunlight for babies dates back to 1921 as a treatment modality for rickets. And this was a breaking news in the newspaper at that time, that sun cured rickets. And rickets, you all know, occurs in children and is a defective mineralization of the skeleton with the clinical features of tetany, convulsions, flattening of the skull, which we call craniotabes, thickening of the wrist epiphyseal plates, and stunted growth. There can sometimes be ricketry rosary, which is the spinal curvature deformity, and there is bowing of the long legs as well. But is rickets a problem of today? And is rickets a problem of us? Yes, very much. Because if you look at the data, the nutritional rickets is prevalent in developing regions of the world, and it is ranked among the top 5 most common diseases in the children. Although I could not find any data for Pakistan, because there is no specific data in the latest nutritional surveys, but in Southeast Asia, there is prevalence about 15 to 18% of the rickets still in this modern era of medicine, where we talk about improving the healthcare and nutritional status of our babies. So rickets may be more common in children who are breastfed and who have less exposure to sunlight. We all know that when we talk about best feeding to any baby, we talk about breastfeeding. And Dr. Shabir will bear with me that we advise the women to exclusively breastfeed the children at least for 2 years of their initial life. But ladies and gentlemen, to my astonishment, breast milk is not an ideal food for your baby because breast milk has no vitamin D. There is only 25 international units per liter of the breast milk, which is a negligible quantity. So in this case, we'll try to see that if we augment the pregnant females with vitamin D and calcium and multivitamins, which is a usual practice, what is the outcome in the children and the mothers who are bearing those children. So this is a study from the Boston Medical Center which shows that 40 mothers who were followed over this period, they daily had an intake of 600 international units of vitamin D. 70% were taking their multivitamins as well. They also had 2 to 3 glasses of milk, which is the regularly prescribed recommended milk intake in pregnancy. And still, ladies and gentlemen, 76% of these mothers and 81% of the newborns had a vitamin D level of less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, which makes them a vitamin D deficient mother and a child. So if we look at the vitamin D deficiency in Pakistan, these are the statistics from 2018 Pakistan National Survey of Nutrition, and it showed that vitamin D deficiency in children less than 5 years is as high as 62.7%, and 13.2% have severe vitamin D deficiency. And if we talk about women, 79.7% were vitamin D deficient, with 25.7% having severe vitamin D deficiency. So, and we also know from the research and literature that there is a strong inverse relationship between maternal 25-hydroxy levels at less than 22 weeks and risk of pre-eclampsia. So, if we improve the vitamin D levels and improve the vitamin D status of the mothers, we can decrease the risk of pre-eclampsia to a considerable degree. And similarly, talking about the risk of cesarean section, this is a very hot debate and topic these days that all mothers, they are now undergoing C-section, and you hardly see any mother undergoing a normal labor and spontaneous vaginal delivery. And most of the time, doctors are blamed. The gynecologists are blamed that they are very, hurriedly want to do and quickly want to get the child out. Therefore, they opt for a cesarean section. Or sometimes the mothers, they don't want to undergo the process of labor and they opt for a cesarean section. But it has been proved by science and literature that vitamin D deficiency is one of the main causes of leading to a cesarean section. And if we could improve the mother's vitamin D level, it could reduce the risk of cesarean section by 400%. So this is a very huge number. So from this, looking at this data, the NICE, which is the National Institute for Health and Clinical Care Excellence, they recommend that all pregnant women should be given vitamin D. In high-risk pregnancies, they should be given high-dose vitamin D with calcium. And patients who are clearly deficient and pregnant, they should be given at least 1,000 international units of vitamin D. On the other hand, since breast milk doesn't contain any vitamin D at all, very, very negligible amount, so at least 4,000 international units per day of vitamin D needs to be supplemented to all lactating mothers to meet the requirement of the infants who are breastfed. Another one of the most important aspects which leads to vitamin D deficiency is obesity. And if I measure the BMI or the waist circumference of all people sitting over here, I would think more than 80% will fall in the category of obesity. And obesity, it leads to less vitamin D. So we have proven with the literature that people who are obese, they have lower levels of vitamin D. This is because in obese, the subcutaneous fat, it stores the vitamin D and results the less release of it in the circulation, leading to less levels in blood. And this is a study which is supporting it, that serum vitamin D levels, they were checked in obese and non-obese adults after exposing them to the same amount of ultraviolet radiation, and the normal weight individuals, they had good levels as compared to the people with BMI of more than 30 who were obese. They had 55% reduction in the levels of vitamin D as compared to the non-obese people, thereby showing that they are deficient because of their obesity. The Endocrine Society, it recommends that adults who are obese, they need at least 2 to 3 times more vitamin D to treat and also to prevent vitamin D deficiency, so their requirements are different. The next question arises when I talked about who is at highest risk was the pigmented skin. So does skin pigment affect the vitamin D synthesis? Let's see what the literature says. The literature says that Caucasians, if they are exposed to UVB, then their vitamin D levels are far better than the same amount of UVB UV exposure to the black, which synthesize vitamin D to a very negligible levels. So there is definitely a role of skin pigmentation in formation of vitamin D, and this is supported by the fact that although vitamin D deficiency is prevalent in USA to a considerable degree, but the highest rates of vitamin D deficiency are seen in African Americans, who have about 76% reported vitamin D deficiency in US. Across the board, African American adults, we all know, are at greater risk for chronic ailments and potentially life-shortening conditions which are associated with vitamin D deficiency now, like hypertension, diabetes, stroke, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and infections like chronic infections like tuberculosis and also cancer. So the higher incidence of these comorbidities in the African American population can be linked to their vitamin D deficiency. So this is also one of the major research topics these days, and this is being studied world over. So now the next question arises. I'm sure this is very simple for you, but I see a lot of students sitting at the back, that what should we measure? I told you about vitamin D levels, that there are two, active and inactive form. One is 25-hydroxyvitamin D and the other is 1,2,5-hydroxyvitamin D. So I told you that after going through the kidneys, they are changed to the active form. But just remember that we measure the inactive form, which is 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and because this is the main indicator of vitamin D status, and it reflects the endogenously produced and supplemental vitamin D. The active form is not a good indicator, and we do not prescribe it for testing in the lab because their levels do not decrease until the vitamin D deficiency is very severe. Now comes the question, when to label a patient as vitamin D deficient. So there are different schools of thoughts and there are different recommendations. There is American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, American Geriatric Society recommendation, Dutchland, Australia, Netherlands, they have their own recommendations. But one recommendation which is followed by most of the authorities is the Endocrine Society recommendations, which shows that if your levels are below 20 nanograms per ml, this is vitamin D deficiency. If you are between 20 to 30, this is the suboptimal range of vitamin D. Anything above 30 is optimal. It should ideally be between 50 to 70, which is the good range in which we try to keep those population who are at highest rate, like obese, people with comorbidities, because these good levels help to build your immune system and prevents you from many diseases. Anything which is above 70 or 100 in some recommendations, is above the normal, but it is not toxic. A level more than 150 milligrams per nanograms per ml is considered as vitamin D intoxication, and I will be talking about vitamin D intoxication in a while. So ladies and gentlemen, giving you an overall view of this and a picture of vitamin D deficiency world around, I must say that there are so many epidemics going on in the world. We talked about NCDs as acting as an epidemic, non-communicable disease. We talked about infectious disease epidemics, but there is a silent epidemic going on, which is the vitamin D deficiency epidemic, which is covering whole of the world, and I must say that this epidemic is turning into a pandemic now, and this is the time that we realize the importance of vitamin D deficiency and do something about it. These facts I am sharing from the global prevalence of vitamin D deficiency, which shows that all across the globe, in countries as advanced as USA, Canada and Australia, there is a high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency, in which you can see the blue blocks showing a level of less than 30 nanograms per ml, and less than 20 is the green box, which is the severe deficiency of vitamin D, and it is present all across the globe, whether you talk about USA, Australia, Korea, New Zealand or Canada. So all of them have very high prevalence, of vitamin D deficiency, and this is the time that we address this silent epidemic. So when we talk about vitamin D, in children I talked about rickets, but we are generally adult physicians and we are more concerned with the adult health. And I, being a female physician, most of the women come to me with either bone pains or body aches and pains or fatigue or generalized lethargy. And sometimes we attribute it to either, this is the female trait that they complain very often, or a fibromyalgia. But we do know that sometimes some of these men and women just present with a fracture. So osteoporosis, which is the porous bones, patients do not complain of any bone pains, but they present with a fracture. On the other hand, patients of osteomalacia, they have body aches and pains and bone pains, and they are a frequent visitor of outpatient department to all the physicians. So osteomalacia and osteoporosis are clearly linked with vitamin D deficiency, and if we correct their vitamin D deficiency, we can prevent many fractures. The Endocrine Society, they have established guidelines both for the prophylaxis of vitamin D deficiency and the treatment of vitamin D deficiency, and I'm going to quickly go through them because I've been getting a lot of questions. How much dose of vitamin D is required in which age group and in which sector of population? So for maintaining a healthy level, which is more than 30 nanograms per ml, you require at least 400 international units of vitamin D per day, but ideally it should be 1000 international units per day. For younger children, 600 international units is the requirement. For people of 19 to 50 years of age and 50 to 70 years of age, if they do not have any additional risk factor, to maintain a level of more than 30 nanograms per ml, which is the optimal level, you have to give 600 international units per day. People who are of advanced age, older people of more than 70 years of age, at least 800 international units, but Endocrine Society and literature shows that around 1500 to 2000 international units per day can be safely given to maintain an adequate level of vitamin D. To maintain the levels of vitamin D in lactating mothers, I told you that 1000 international units is the minimum requirement, but 1500 to 2000 should ideally be given if you want to maintain a good level. I already discussed with you that you have to increase the vitamin D dosage in people who are obese because they store vitamin D in their fat, people who are on medication like anticonvulsant, antifungals, glucocorticoids and aid therapy need an escalation of daily replacement of vitamin D, and to maintain a tolerable upper limit for the age, you sometimes have to increase the dose in some group of these patients. Now to treatment. Coming on to the treatment of established vitamin D deficiency. What should you give? D2 or D3? Both may be used and both are equally effective. In age less than 1 year, the 2000 international units per day or 50,000 international units per week, and this has to be given continuously for 6 weeks. This is important. You just don't have to replace it for 2 to 3 weeks. Continuously you have to replace it daily as 2000 international units or 50,000 international units per week for a period of 6 weeks, and then you check the levels and achieve a level of 30 nanograms per ml. And when you check and you have reached your target of getting a level of more than 30, then you have to continue on the maintenance therapy. This is equally important as well. And you have to prescribe about 1000 international units per day to keep the normal above 30. In children who are older and less than 18 years of age, initially you give 2000 international units or 50,000 international units per week for a 6 weeks, and same you have to continue for a prolonged period of 1000 international units per day to maintain a level of more than 30. This holds true for adults as well, in which you have to give a loading dose for 6 weeks to to 8 weeks, which is 50,000 international units per week, achieve a level of more than 30, and then continue with the maintenance therapy of 1,500 to 2,000 international units per day. In the high-risk groups, which I already told you, in obese, in advanced age, in people on medication, in chronic ailments, immunosuppressed people, you have to give 6,000 to 10,000 international units per day for 8 weeks, achieve a level of more than 30 nanograms per ml, and then replace with 3,000 to 6,000 international units per day. Now the question arises. I've been taking vitamin D for months and years, and I don't know if I'm vitamin D intoxicated. So you can check if you are vitamin D intoxicated by a stall which is very next to this, who are checking the vitamin D levels for you. But talking about vitamin D toxicity, and toxicity we say when the levels are more than 150. This is like worrying about vitamin D toxicities, like worrying about drowning when you are dying of thirst. So we are all vitamin D deficient, but the negligible small, I think less than 0.01% intoxication that is reported, we are all worried about that maybe it is too much vitamin D. So this is the study that I am sharing from 2009, and this study showed that for a period of 6 years, people were taking 50,000 international units of vitamin D every 2 weeks for a period of 6 years. And this equals to about 3,000 international units per day. And the average level that they could achieve was 40 nanograms per ml, and none of them developed intoxication. So don't be afraid of giving too much vitamin D for a very prolonged period of intoxication, for a very long period with the risk and in mind that they may be intoxicated with vitamin D. So the excess of vitamin D cannot lead to the real intoxication or toxicity of vitamin D, and they should not be worrying about giving too much of for a very prolonged period. So when I talked to you initially about the synthesis of vitamin D in the body, let me revise it once again for you, that in the skin the vitamin D is formed, in the liver it is converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and in the kidneys it is then activated. So this means that the receptors for the vitamin D should be present in these 3 places. They should be in your skin, they should be in your liver, and they should be in your kidneys. So these are the 3 places where the vitamin D actually acts. But ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, this is not the case. The case is that the vitamin D receptors are present throughout your body. It's in your brain, it's in your parathyroid, your muscles, skin, heart, kidneys, arteries, bones, intestines, pancreas, liver, lung. So if God has these receptors in your body placed, obviously they are going to have some role. So obviously if the receptors are present at every inch of the body, that means that they have a role to play. And this is why we talk about vitamin D deficiency association with such multi-system disorders. You talk about respiratory problems. Professor Kamran Cheema will educate you in the next few minutes about the respiratory issues. We have a role of vitamin D. You talk about brain and mental health. Vitamin D comes and plays its role over there. You talk about heart. I see many cardiologists sitting over here. They will tell you how it improves your ejection fraction and improves the heart failure. You talk about pancreas, the diabetes, type 1, type 2. You will be listening to a few of the slides in the next few slides how it helps over there. Bone health is an established important factor related to vitamin D. Muscle health, and so many other diseases like multiple sclerosis, like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, and many cancers including colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and infections like influenza, tuberculosis, and our very favorite these days, COVID-19. You talk about any disease and I can quote you that vitamin D deficiency has a role, and improving your vitamin D levels will prevent you from serious illness. This is the study that is a very good study which shows, this is data from Grassroots in 2013, that if you improve your vitamin D levels, then there is an decrease in the incidence of all the diseases that you can think of. Starting right from your birth, which is your low birth weight, to the older age group problems like heart attack, pancreatic cancers, renal cancers, and type 1 diabetes, infections like tuberculosis, breast cancers, multiple sclerosis. You name the disease and there it is on the checklist of vitamin D deficiency. So let's talk about a few of the cancers that are related to vitamin D deficiency. One of the most common cancers in male is the colon or colorectal cancer, and this has shown that vitamin D, if corrected, there is a 50% projected reduction in the colon cancer if you supplement the vitamin D deficient people with 1,000 international units per day. Talking about the breast cancer, which is the most common cancer one of the most common cancers in the female population. This is a pooled analysis and it shows that there is a 50% lower risk of developing a breast cancer. This is a preventive study if you improve the vitamin D levels. Talking about the infections, influenza, which is the baby of the COVID. We always talked about influenza when we talked about respiratory epidemics previously, but now we talk about COVID for the last 1.5 years. And this is a study which is a randomized trial of supplementing vitamin D to prevent seasonal influenza A in school children. And in this study, it was shown that 1,200 international units of vitamin D led to a 42% reduction in the influenza in school children. Talking about diabetes, I told you that the vitamin D receptors are also present in the pancreatic cells, and the observational studies in humans suggest that there is an association between vitamin D deficiency and type 1 diabetes. This is a case-control study of 720 children with type 1 diabetes who were compared with 2,610 age-matched children without diabetes. And there was an association between type 1 diabetes and key genetic polymorphism linked to vitamin D deficiency, lending support to the possibility of an association between vitamin D deficiency and type 1 disease. So the beta islet cells, they have vitamin D receptors, and these produce insulin, you all know, and type 1 and type 2, we both know that there is either deficiency of insulin production or the metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. We have insulin resistance issue, which are again linked to vitamin D deficiency. Talking about autoimmune diseases, mental health diseases, chronic infections, cancers, you name it, and I will give you with the data that vitamin D is linked to it. Multiple sclerosis, one of the common diseases that neurologists see, that vitamin D intake and incidence of multiple sclerosis is also related, and they are inversely related. The vitamin D intake, if more than 400 international units per day is given to the population, it decreases the incidence of multiple sclerosis by 41%. Rheumatoid arthritis, we yesterday talked about in the rheumatology about rheumatological problems, and this is a study from Iowa Women Health Study which showed that taking 400 international units per day of vitamin D was inversely related to rheumatoid arthritis in women, decreasing it to 44%. Talking about the number one killer in the world, hypertension and cardiovascular disease. So low vitamin D status is an established risk factor for cerebrovascular disease by now, and we know that vitamin D is involved in so many of the mechanisms of cardiovascular disease pathogenesis, including proliferation of vascular smooth muscles, vascular calcification, production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, regulation of the renin-angiotensin system. So if you are vitamin D deficient, you have a poorer prognosis. So vitamin D supplementation, it improves the clinical outcomes of patients with coronary artery disease, and this is the dystamic analysis and meta-analysis that I am sharing with you today from the scientific reports, which shows that the vitamin D supplementation in vitamin D deficient subjects had a favorable effect on diastolic blood pressure and parathyroid hormone concentrations in comparison with control group. Therefore, vitamin D may be recommended to be used as an adjunct therapy to routine treatment in coronary artery disease patients with vitamin D deficient. And who is vitamin D deficient? Almost everyone is vitamin D deficient. So, however, we need to further support this argument with further research. This is another study from the American Heart Association that atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, thrombosis and vascular pathologies are also related to vitamin D deficiency, and there is a decreased incidence of peripheral vascular disease by 80% if we improve the vitamin D levels to more than 35 nanograms per ml. Talking about heart failure, another complication of the cardiovascular disease, the low vitamin D levels, they are a risk factor and they are a contributing factor in the pathogenesis of congestive heart failure as supported by this study. Mood बहुत important है, क्योंकि mood अच्छा नहीं है तो दिन अच्छा नहीं है और दिन अच्छा नहीं है तो कोई काम सही नहीं है. So the mood is also related to vitamin D. This has been proven that the sunlight exposure improves your mood because sunlight produces beta endorphins, and these beta endorphins in the blood gives you a feeling of well-being. So sunlight exposure may elevate your serum beta endorphin levels, and these beta endorphin levels then improve your mood by more than 44% as compared to people who have less exposure to sunlight. So many other psychiatric problems or mental health issues like dementia, depression, schizophrenia and cognitive decline have been associated with vitamin deficiency, and vitamin D and risk of cognitive decline shows that there is a relative risk reduction of 31% if you improve your vitamin D levels. Talking about the most talked disease these days, which is COVID-19. We all know that SARS-CoV-2 is playing a havoc all around the globe, and this is not only a respiratory problem, but it is a multi-system involvement. इसमें हम thrombosis की भी अब बात करते हैं और multi-system organ की involvement की भी बात करते हैं. So the cytokine storm or the pulmonary alveoli, where the inflammatory markers are released, leading to a horrific picture in which the patient's saturation drops and the patient's markers, they go sky high. The vitamin D is involved and runs its role over there as well. Vitamin D not only decreases the viral replication, but it improves the cellular natural immunity and adaptive immunity, which help patient go into the severe disease by decreasing the cytokine storm and inflammatory markers. These are some of the studies. Many of them were shared by Professor Javed Akram in the previous lecture when we talked about COVID-19 and vitamin D association as well. But this is also one of the good studies that I came across recently published in 2021 that circulating vitamin D level status and clinical prognostic indices in COVID-19 patients, which stated that the deficiency is associated with compromised inflammatory responses and higher pulmonary involvement in COVID-19 infected patients. Vitamin D assessment during COVID-19 infection could be a useful analysis for possible therapeutic interventions, but I say do not go for the levels, just supplement them with vitamin D because it's going to help them recover faster. So vitamin D and COVID-19 is growing interest, and there is a lot of research going on because it is a facilitator of the innate immune response during the SARS-CoV-2 infection. They are reportedly lower in critically ill patients and severely ill patients who are admitted to ICUs than the patients who are admitted in wards or in outpatient setting. And in a study from UK of 489 individuals who have vitamin D levels measured within 1 year of testing for COVID-19, the risk of a positive COVID-19 test was higher in those who were likely vitamin D deficient with a level of less than 20 nanograms per ml. And this is also supporting the evidence that vitamin D deficiency is linked with more chances of getting COVID-19, and if you get COVID-19, of more severe disease. So ladies and gentlemen, with which if you ask me to talk about vitamin D, maybe I would be needing hours and hours of time, but due to limitation of time, I am just leaving with you with this thought that this silent epidemic needs our attention. We as physicians should be advocating the supplementation of vitamin D to the population and diagnosing the deficiency when possible by testing it, and if not possible to get that test because of the portability issue, never be afraid of toxicity of vitamin D and prescribe vitamin D to the patients for the general well-being of the patients and improving their health outcome. So today, give a stranger one of your smiles, because this might be the only sunshine he sees all day. Thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have any comments,